Hello and welcome to Baseball Barbacast, the only baseball podcast in the world that is ecstatic to talk about the Central Divisions, and I am not even joking. I'm Jordan Schusterman. I am not with Jake Mintz. I am very excited to be joined by our special co-host today. It is Curt Hogg of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Curt, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So Curt is joining me today because a couple of days ago, Jake Mintz, my dear friend and co-host, he got married. I was there. It was great. Curt was not there, unfortunately. I don't know if he maybe was on the B list or C list or D list. I won't speak to Jake's, wedding guest planning and whatnot. But Jake got married on Sunday. It was beautiful. We had a great time. Congratulations to him and his lovely wife, Tamar, who I've known since kindergarten. So it was a very cool day for me, selfishly, just to be around a lot of people that Jake and I have gotten to know over the years. But Jake did the very reasonable thing of being like, hey, I'm going to take a few days here after getting married. And so I said, you know what? That's fine. Go ahead, because I've been wanting to do a podcast with my friend Curt Hogg for quite some time. And so this is giving me the perfect opportunity. And anytime Jake is not around to do a podcast with me, I think, okay, who do I want to talk ball with? And who covers a team that is interesting right now? And Curt, congratulations. You fit both of those qualifications. So here you are.
Well, I certainly earned the second part of that. I did a lot to make the Brewers interesting. I'll tell you that. The pitching lab.
I think you do.
It originates in this room.
Well, it's interesting. You say do a lot to make the Brewers interesting. It's funny you say that because before the Brewers were this good, you were actually doing things to make them interesting. But now their record alone and the fact that they're running away with the NL Central, that also makes them interesting. And you continue to make them interesting in the way that you write them on top of that. So it all works out very well.
Well, that's a nice way to flatter the guest. We did go into the season wondering how this team was going to be interesting and how we were going to make them interesting, like Jackson Chourio.
That was an easy one.
That was bullet point number one. Yes. And then meeting with editors. And then after that, it was like, pray?
Okay. So
Pat Murphy is probably bullet point number two. That was going to be interesting no matter how this went.
Totally. And we will certainly get to Murph here as part of this. And yeah, we are going to spend the first chunk of the show talking about the first place Milwaukee Brewers, who, alongside the Phillies are probably in the safest shape to be clinching. In fact, they might clinch a division title before anybody else, the way things are shaking out right now, which that fact by itself is pretty stunning. So we're going to talk about the Brewers. We are going to talk about both Central divisions because, of course, the NL Central you've become intimately familiar with, but the AL Central is fascinating and has been another fascinating story this season. And then we'll see how much time, maybe we'll hit a couple other things on the back half here. But let's start with the Brew-crew and what you kind of got into right there off the jump there, right? Because now it's very easy to look back as we're winding down the regular season, heading towards October and say, wow, one of the biggest stories of the year is the Brewers are awesome, right? So the external expectations were very clear, right? I mean, you go back, you look at the preseason projections, they didn't have them as necessarily a bad team, but as you mentioned about the interesting part of it, they look to be very, very average to slightly below average. A lot of turnover. You trade Corbin Burns, Craig Counsell's gone, a lot of young players, and enough to the point where it was like, okay, the Brewers are probably not going to be bad because they just find ways to not stink, but it was hard to see them being an awesome team. My first question for you, Curt, is talking to the people in this organization and going into the year. I know Murph had a lot of interesting quotes in spring training about, don't doubt us, but those were fairly cliche along those lines, but he was also very realistic. What were the Brewers' expectations coming into the season, from what you can recall?
Internally, the Brewers system had them better than everyone. Like everyone externally had them. Now, when I heard that in spring, my first thought was, well, everyone probably thinks they're going to be better. Like Chris Getz, I think the other day said like, well, I thought we were going to lose 100 games.
No, surely not 120.
Not 120. So even the White Sox internal projections, although I've never heard a GM outright say that, were probably skew a little optimistic. You like the guys you have in-house. Even maybe you play with the math a little. I don't know. Turns out they were, I guess, right. Maybe even undersold it a little bit. But the Brewers, I know this, were not alone as far as NL Central teams in terms of what their projection was of the Brewers. There were other teams in the division that were like, these guys are going to be better than a lot of people think they are. That's just, I don't know what goes into that, in these systems, whether it's like they're factoring in the fact that the Brewers always do this, no matter who's in charge. Maybe it's the defense, the young guys. There's a lot of variance there too. So that was probably a big part of the projections, is they're like playing a cast of 20 to 24 to 25-year-olds up and down the roster. And that's harder to project than the Cardinals.
Yeah, that's true. They have the opposite problem. And of course, the Cardinals, by their projection systems, were the favorites by a lot of measures. I picked them. I thought there's no way they're going to be as bad as they were last year. And I liked some of the offseason moves that they made, and even some of the in-season moves that they made, right? And they're still sort of hanging around, but certainly not at all for the mix in the division. But maybe to your point, right, there was a lot of young guys, and sometimes that's a bad thing. And sometimes when it all goes well, and certainly in the first half, when you had the performances of the likes of Joey Ortiz, and I know he's cooled off, and the offensive performances of the likes of Bryce Durang, that really maybe was the level with the athleticism goes hand in hand with better than you expect. But I do also think that something that we've made jokes about, we referenced on the show recently when you talk about the Brewers, maybe we were just underselling the obvious parts, which is that the bullpen is always good. And I know Devin Williams wasn't a part of that. We can put the bullpen in a second. But they have definitely three, maybe four superstar players. Three for the first part of the season, which is William Contreras, one of the best catchers in baseball, Willy Adames, one of the best shortstops in baseball, and Christian Yelich playing like 85% of MVP Christian Yelich. And then now Chourio has kind of filled in since Yelich has come back. Were we also just maybe underselling those three, or at the very least Contreras and Adames coming into the season?
No, I definitely think all three. I mean,
and
Willie
Peralta,
was in Peralta
too. Yep.
So Willie was coming off not a great offensive season last year. So that was probably undersold a little bit, and reasonably so. Contreras, maybe a bit of a prove it year. Okay, you did it once, do it again. And then Yelich, definitely a prove it year. He had a much improved 2023 season after three pretty mediocre seasons, especially on that contract. And that's I keep thinking about this when I'm watching the Brewers, and like their offense has struggled a little bit in the past 2 weeks, and it's like, man, Christian Yelich was playing at like a 155, 160 WRC plus. He was an all-star starter, and like it wasn't even really close to who the best outfielder was in the National League. And then the back thing flared up again. So that is going to be front and center on my mind watching this team in the playoffs, especially if they do what they've done the last few years and not really score runs. Once they get to October, it's like, man, they could probably use the guy who looks, like you said, like 85% of MVP Yelich.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's fair. But I do also think that because of how low the bar is for offense right now, I've said this all year, you really only need a couple guys to at least get there. Now, once you get there, it's so true. We've seen this offense go quiet so fast. We've seen other good offenses just completely disappear. And that's total. I do want to get to like expectations for the postseason towards maybe the back end of the conversation. But obviously they have put themselves in position to win the division and maybe even get a bye, right? I mean, that by itself, if you had told me, okay, the Brewers are going to come out on top of this weird division that's difficult to predict, that by itself would not stun me. But that they would be on pace to win, 93 games, 94 games, that maybe have a chance at a that would be genuinely stunning.
Yeah.
And so let's get to the part where I think a lot of the people externally, and this will kind of fold into the postseason conversation too, which is the pitching. Now, this pitching staff beyond Peralta was already going to be a bit of a mystery box before the year, and that we've had a lot of change in personnel because of the trade deadline and guys coming up and guys getting hurt and the likes, right? But I think it is important for you to kind of give us some insight into how that part of the team has actually functioned, because I think that is the most basic thing for the casual fan that maybe does know how awesome William Contreras and Willy Adames and Peralta, and now that Devin Williams is back and he looks better than ever, and like, okay, great, those are pieces that we're familiar with. But how are they getting outs during these other innings? And we can extend that into the postseason as well. Have you watched this also up close saying, how are they doing this? Or are there some of these guys have proven to you like, no, I believe in this guy. I'm not ashamed to give Tobias Myers the ball for a postseason start.
I will shout Colin Ray's praises from the mountains. Okay. You can't see it on screen here, but it's on a nice little flowery placard behind me.
Good.
Chris Hook. Have you talked about Chris Hook much on the pod?
No, please do. This is exactly yes. Why you're here. Because we just say like, oh, the Brewers pitching, of course, but like there are people behind that in the front office and on the coaching staff. So please talk about them.
So the Brewers pitching lab gets, among other teams' pitching labs, that's the colloquial phrase for they just churn out dudes. Mm-hmm. And I think really what we're talking about when we say that is pitching coach Chris Hook. I mean, there's other guys on the staff too, but for all the talk of how important it was, how important Counsell was, and how big of a loss that was, it turns out that like they kept their entire staff, and that was just as big of a deal as losing the manager. He does a really good job working with these guys, like blending the human aspect of baseball and the analytical aspect, and like finding out what it is you do well and how you interpret that and how you view the game and what makes you tick and all those things. And you have to look at what they've done the past 6-7 years with not just Corbin and Woody and Peralta, but some of these lesser known guys too that have come around and had great years. So that's where it starts. But yeah, Tobias Myers has been legitimate. I mean, maybe outperforming some of the peripherals a little bit, but like they're also going to do that when you have this defense. Colin Ray's in the same boat where he's on pace to throw 170 innings or 160 innings this year, and he's pitching well. So it's not your standard like playoff rotation, but they can make up for that in other ways with the way that the bullpen is built.
Yeah, now that last year when you looked at what they were able to do last year, and again, team that won the division last year, right? And then a very swift exit at the hands of the D-backs. Very swift. Just, I mean, it was over before it even started.
That was my first time covering this team in the playoffs, and I was like driving home from the ballpark, like not even having set in that, like, oh, we're done. I'm done working.
Right. It was like
we're not going back tomorrow.
Wednesday afternoon, it was over, right? Wednesday night, maybe.
Yeah.
But again, I mentioned last year, again, whatever, postseason aside, the bullpen last year, we had outrageous performances from Bryce Wilson, who's now been pitching, but hasn't necessarily been an impact guy, bouncing the region. But last year, outstanding in relief. Payamps, unbelievable in relief. Hobie Milner, unbelievable in relief, and then Abner Uribe. And then Piguero pitched a lot, but those were the ones last year that like were huge parts of that bullpen. This year, I guess McGill was part of it last year too, but wasn't quite as good. This year, who are the guys in the bullpen beyond Devin Williams? And by the way, we should not undersell the fact that this is a huge part of the story. The fact that he missed the first 3 months, right, and they were able to get out to this huge lead, like is about the guys that we're about to talk about, but also Devin Williams has looked just outstanding since he got like he's looking, which was not. I mean, again, back stuff is terrifying, right? And I know he got treated, which is good, but like that is we should not. I don't want to gloss over Devin Williams because he is still the superpower at the back end of this bullpen. But who are the other guys? Who are some of the new guys? I know some of them are the same. I know Payamps has pitched a lot. He's been good, but like Milner's got a 5 ERA, and I know he's still part of the group. But who are some of the other guys that have really shown up in the bullpen?
What do you got on Jared Koenig?
I got some stuff on Jared Koenig, but I don't think most people listening do. So help us out here. I'm teeing it up for you.
No, well-adjusted people may not have a lot, but this is what the Brewers do. I mean, like bullpens are volatile year to year. They're not the only team that does this. I mean, you've seen what the Guardians are doing this year, but they just pick up guys from various spots. Jared Koenig had barely any MLB experience, pitched an indie ball, minor league deal. ERA sub-2, I think, in like 50-something innings. He's
throwing so hard.
And throwing hard, yeah. Like 97.
What in the world? Like because he was like this undrafted or drafted released indie ball, like came up with Oakland a couple years ago, and I was like, oh, what a great story. Here's this guy in the big leagues, and I was like, that's great. I'm so glad Jared Koenig with his his 6 ERA in Oakland in 2022. I was like, great. I'll I'll never think of you again. Like you were a big leaguer. I'll never be able to take that away from you. But he was 28, right? I was like, that's probably the end of the Jared Koenig story. Nope. Respectfully, and no,
he
that's
throws
not the
high
case.
90s. There are guys. I mean, in spring training, the room is just too big. There's like 60, 70 guys, and there are players that like you just at some point pretty early on, you just unless they do something super flashy, you kind of have to resign yourself as a writer to say, I don't know if I'm probably not going to get to covering this guy's story this spring. Unfortunately, Jared Koenig was one of those, and I paid like no attention to him or his outings all spring. And then sure enough, he comes up and he throws like 3 innings here early on, kind of part of a shuttle back and forth. And you're like, wait a second.
Right. Because he did not make the team out of camp.
He did not. Nope.
Okay. So that puts you that makes it a little less bad. That doesn't make you look as bad at your job.
Yeah. I mean, one of the guy that did make it was Brian Hudson, and he's pitched really well. He was DFA'd for Yamamoto in LA.
I was going to say.
Yeah,
that he's the other big one, and those guys have really, especially as lefties, have kind of filled. I know Milner's still been okay, but those are the two lefties.
Those are the guys,
been impact guys for sure. And I know Hudson is now injured and maybe dealing with some stuff, but those guys, Payamps has been good, and then Trevor McGill's the other one.
He might be the unsung hero.
Was the closer? Yeah. I mean, he was the closer while Williams was out, right?
Yeah, 20-something saves. I think he only blew his first one when they tried to go like 2 innings with him. Probably not a good idea. And then so really he only blew like 1 save of his last 3 months as the closer, which is pretty good if you're filling in for Devin Williams. Like if Devin Williams did that, you'd be like a round of applause. Yeah.
Right. And so now you just have this incredible group. And I want to get to a couple other guys later who maybe will be bolstering this unit. I know we are certainly fans of, but we'll save that for a little bit later. But my last question about the pitching, and then we certainly got to talk about Chourio, is as we spin this to the postseason. All right, let's say it starts tomorrow. Let's say all these guys stay healthy. Aaron Savali, another guy they brought in midseason. Frankie Montas, they brought in midseason. Clearly, those were acknowledgments. We probably still need some help here, right? Either if it's injury, insurance, or just like some sort of upside on the mound. We know Peralta, if they can line it up, and the way it's shaking out, they probably will be able to line up, who they're going to have either in that wild card series against the 6th seed or in the first round, DS. What do you expect this rotation to look like in the postseason? I'm sure you guys are talking about this literally every day. So where are you at right now?
We are, and I have no answer. I mean, that's like half serious. I guess Colin Ray's probably.
So do you think he's a lock because he's earned it to what he's done so far?
The Brewers, as close to a lock as the Brewers can have. Okay. They are a team of great mystery. And sometimes incredibly boring moves, like 162 games worth of like non-splashy moves. So maybe Colin Ray would fit perfectly, but also the way the pitching. I mean, Frankie Montas is working his way up to that level. Tobias Myers has pitched great, but I'm not sure they would do that in like a wild card series. He would probably absolutely start games for them in a longer series,
game 3 or 4. Or 5,
yeah. The way the pitching is set up. You could go a variety of ways. DL Hall has looked great.
That's another one.
Aaron Ashby was throwing 92 about a month and a half ago and couldn't throw strikes as a starter, and now he's
I had written him off. I was like, all right. Oh, absolutely. I was like Aaron Ashby, who I was very excited about over the last couple of years, and I was like, well, they can't all be awesome, and now he's back and looking good.
And suddenly he's throwing harder than he did before the shoulder surgery. His stuff looks filthy. He's probably the guy I trust the most, not named Devin Williams in the bullpen right now, which is insane to think about.
Wait, really? You said Ashby's?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh my God. I don't think he's the guy used in that spot, but dude, he's been like untouchable.
No, I know. So but to that point, I think that really gets at it, especially in a short series. Let's say they're in the wild card series, I could totally see them just shrinking the games and just going basically bullpenning through the wildcard series and saving Montas or Myers or Savali. I mean, obviously some of those guys are going to have to start those games, but you basically save those guys to start in the DS and just try and bullpen your way through the short series.
And that would be my
They have enough guys to do that, especially when we get to some of the ones later.
And you could also use like Tobias Myers for like 6 outs.
Totally.
That could very well work.
Right. So, and we'll see. Obviously, you have to choose. Sometimes those shorter series, you leave pitchers off the roster, and they'd have those choices to make. All right, that's the pitching. Let's talk about Chourio before we do quick prospects, and then we'll take a break. As you mentioned, coming into the season, this was the Brewers' story. They guaranteed all this money to this kid that had never played in the big leagues. Of course, he's one of the top prospects in baseball, but you never know what you're going to get. And for the first couple months, he wasn't horrible. Like he had some rough stretches, but again, we've seen even worse from other rookies, over early parts of their season. Like he was treading water. It wasn't pretty, but for the youngest player in baseball, it was like, you know what? This is fine. And because they were winning, we weren't worried about it. There wasn't any sort of like, you tell me, maybe, I don't know if there was like, oh, we got to send him down, whatever. But like, it seemed like it was like, when I watched, I was like, okay, this isn't great, but he's batting 8th, he's batting 9th, he's figuring it out. He's born in 2004, whatever, right? And then at some point in like late June, I want to say, maybe a little bit before then, it just clicks. So my main Chourio question is, was it obvious when he figured it out? Did he talk about what he figured out and what changed? And are we ultimately underrating the fact that they now have one of the, 20, 30 best players in baseball, at least as of the last couple of months, and how much of a difference that has made, not just to mention what it's done with Yelich out?
Yeah. For me, and this is a little bit of benefit of hindsight, but there was a game like June 2nd or June 3rd in Detroit where the Tigers specifically they wanted to face Chourio. They brought in an arm for that spot, like the tie game in like the 6th inning. And all year long, the Brewers have pinch hit for him in those spots. They got some lefties on the bench. Jake Bowers or someone would be the guy. They stuck with him, and he had a couple like better at bats in recent days. Had homered a couple days before, and he lines it double to the gap. Brewers take the lead. They win the game. Like that moment stood out to me, and it probably stands out now because he hasn't made it out the rest of the way.
Yeah. I mean that is basically when. I mean, when you look at the splits, he homers against the White Sox on June 2nd, but then that series in Detroit was shortly after that. And yeah, I mean, he's just turned it on. And while we've texted a little bit about this, I think one of the things when we talked about Chourio as this exciting prospect was like, oh, he's this power speed center fielder. And he's barely played center field. And I know the defense, there's a lot of some discrepancies about how good some people say he's not been a good defender. Some of the metrics say he has been a good defender. None of that really matters at this point when he's hitting the way that he is. But as far as long-term prospects, whether he's going to be a center fielder or not, that is sort of interesting as far as how we evaluate his long-term future. But the point is right now, the way that he's hitting is remarkable. I mean, it's just, it is. And how would you describe? Because it's not like he's hitting the ball, 120 off the bat.
No,
but he is hitting it all over the place, and his contactability is very interesting.
He is now plus across the board.
Yeah,
and he can do damage on a variety of pitches, and especially like damage pitches. If you make a mistake to him, he's 20 years old and he punishes it. He stopped chasing for a large percentage of the time. Like that was his big issue early on, and like. So it's not huge adjustments really that have led to this, but sometimes like with super talented guys,
it's just a matter of time. Yeah. It's just a matter of time. Like and of course he's still chasing a decent amount, but he's not striking out that much, right? I mean, it's still an above average strikeout rate or whatever, better than whatever, you know what I mean? It's only 20%, which is below the league average. And yeah, man, he's whatever. He's running. He's got his 97th percentile sprint speed. Like he's clearly impacting the game in so many ways. But the other thing we have to mention is Murph, right? And like, this is we'll get to Counsell with the Cubs after the break. So let's move Counsell to the side. But he is a singular personality, and obviously you get to see it every day. I guess my main question is like, he's been around the Brewers for a long time, right? And so it's not like he's a new character to you. So now that he's in charge, quote unquote, is he any different? Like, what is it like now doing it on an everyday basis? Because I imagine you were not talking to him every day when he was the bench coach.
No, it is. I mean, of course it's going to be different. That's the role of the job. And we've also gotten to see a different side of Murph. Like when the hire first happened, people that were skeptical of it would be like, how's that gonna work? Murph was the joking guy, the lighthearted guy, the guy that would give everyone crap, literally everyone, and he still is that guy. But there's this the college coach side of him is still there, and it comes out. It works 100%. With this team. I don't know if it would work with every team, but it works with this team, and this dude believes it. There are some college coaches, I don't know if they believe it, but like this is the only way this guy knows the game.
But I'm glad you said it, though. I think it is something about this team in particular. I think it's not an accident that it is one of the youngest position, maybe the youngest position player group.
I think it has been at times. Yeah, I don't know if it still is, but
them in Cleveland.
But they have an interesting mix too, because it's not just young guys, and they're old guys. Like if you do believe in the sort of like the clubhouse chemistry, the vibes part of baseball, which. This year, I certainly am starting to believe in it. We've gone from Counsell ball to Murph ball, and I'm like, wow, this stuff does matter.
It does.
They've got Adames. Yelich is like quietly a great guy in the clubhouse, like great leader. Wade Miley's still around.
Reese, of course. That's a good new face to add in terms of the. I mean, but right, like, why would you say like Willie is just like. Willie is the best. I mean, we've talked about him forever, but as far as like it's not just the fact that he's a shortstop with 30 homers. That's great too. That's the most important thing, obviously. But as far as just like having him be at the top of your kind of clubhouse hierarchy is also just outstanding. So,
and I don't know if you know this, but Willie has a big record this year. 13 3-run homers, tied the MLB record.
This thing.
What do you make of that?
Blew my mind when because I guess my question about that record, and then we'll do a couple minutes on prospects and we'll take a break, is when did you know this was a thing? Because I didn't know until he tied Griffey.
Well, it went from like, oh, this is kind of funny. He just keeps hitting 3-run homers, and they started calling him like Steph Curry and stuff. And then in Cincinnati a couple weeks ago, he hit his 12th. And all of a sudden, everyone is suddenly like furiously searching about this record. This record,
freaking out. Yeah. Oh,
quotes on the record. I mean, it is a record, but quotes on the record. I'm doing a little work here, and all of a sudden, they're like, "He's one away from Ken Griffey's all-time record." And then 2 days later, he ties it, and it all happened so fast, and it is the most bizarre. No, maybe not the most bizarre record. We have a lot of bizarre records, but it's.
That's a great one.
It's funny.
It's random, basically. I mean,
but three-run homers are good.
3-run homers are the best, right?
Yeah.
We love 3-run homers. So Willie Adames is great. He will. We'll see. I mean, it's random enough to where he might just not hit one for the rest of the season. Watch, he doesn't hit one for the rest of the season, and then like first step out of the postseason, 3-run homer. What doesn't count for the record, but it goes. All right. So here's the point where if Jake was the co-host, he'd be like, "All right, Jordan, I don't care about these prospects. Let's take a break." But I'm in charge today. So, Curt, let's do a couple minutes. Not about all the prospects. I want to talk about prospects, 2 pitchers that might be relevant, maybe, in the next couple weeks, and then a prospect who will not be relevant in the next couple weeks, but who might be very relevant in the future years. The first 2 pitchers we have to mention are 2 names you couldn't forget. Jacob Misiorowski, it's not a name you're going to forget, and even more unforgettable, Craig Yoho. These are 2 pitchers, one of which, Jacob Misiorowski, came into the year as one of the top pitching prospects in baseball, and most notably was promoted to AAA recently and moved to the bullpen. A move that I think a lot of people thought with his issues throwing strikes. Now, again, he had bouts in AA where it was like, oh no, he's clearly a starter, and maybe he is still long-term. But Misiorowski, just ridiculous stuff, 100 miles an hour, outrageous extension, all these things. That's what it looks like. That's what you expect. And then you have Craig Yoho, which is a totally other. His whole backstory, we don't have time to get into, but the point is one of the most ridiculous changeups you'll ever see in your life that he throws like 50% of the time and has an absurd whiff rate, and he has one of the lowest ERAs in the minors. Will we see? Now, Yoho is in AAA now also. Is there a chance we will see either of these 2 guys? We know there are a lot of guys in the big leagues that are succeeding right now, but it doesn't seem like an accident that they would move Misiorowski to the bullpen at this stage and move him to AAA. Is there any chance we could see either of these guys either in case of injury or as part of the plan?
I think Misiorowski is the more likely guy right now than Yoho. Sort of part of that is like the spots they're being used in AAA. You can kind of read into that a little bit.
Yep.
The other part is like you think of bullpen arm, come up prospect guy, like a David Price sort of situation. It's Mizorowski. Like, yellow stuff is disgusting. Like, the changeup might be the best changeup in the minor leagues.
Yeah.
Probably is.
Yeah.
But
he's throwing 92.
He's throwing 92, and he's also got a little more like, he's had Tommy John twice. He's got a little more.
And he's got other injuries too.
And
he's
other
got
injuries,
all kinds of stuff.
And Mizorowski is on an innings limit too, so that might matter somewhat. Okay. But I mean, I think the Brewers should do it. If you're asking me my opinion, like, figure out who your best 26 are, and boy, oh boy, this guy's got a chance to be one of your best, like, 12. Now, sure, maybe he doesn't find the strike zone.
Yeah.
But if he does, no one hits it.
Yeah. No, for sure.
He does not get touched. He gets weak contact. Mm-hmm. And that's, like, we talked about this bullpenning strategy that they could piece together in some games. Like, that's the arm that you want there. It hasn't happened yet. We've seen other prospects getting called up. It's not clear that it's going to happen. We're running out of time a little bit, but there's still time.
All I would say about him is I hope that they don't wait all the way until the postseason and then be like, surprise.
No, that would be
and
bad.
I don't, because we've seen teams do this before where it's just like ultimate secret weapon stuff. And it's like, no. His debut should not be in game 2 of the wild card series.
No.
Because he's already in AAA. Like, he could come up tomorrow and get some outs and like start to get ready. But clearly there's still, I mean, you look at his game logs, there's some outings where he's completely untouchable. And then there's some outings where he still walks 3 guys and then he gets pulled. Right. So there's versions of that. But yeah, I mean, stuff wise, he might have the best stuff in the minors. Right. I mean, he's got
he very well might. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's certainly up there.
You saw him in the Futures game. It was completely unbelievable. So those 2 guys, just want to put them on the radar, because whether they're relevant in the next couple of weeks, we'll see. But the other guy we have to talk about is another name that especially if you just read it, you will be like, I'm sorry, who is this? But we have to mention him, even though he might not be relevant for 5 years, and that is Jesus Mate. First of all, am I saying that correctly?
You are saying it correctly. It's not Jesus made.
Jesus made is how you read it if you are just a dude in Sheboygan. but Jesus Mate, who they signed out of Dominican Republic for like $1 million last year. I'm bringing him up because there's a world where like a year from now, we're talking about him as like a top 10 prospect in baseball. And like 4 months ago, basically nobody knew who he was if you weren't covering, Dominican, amateur stuff. When did you first hear about him, and how excited should we be? Like, how are they doing backflips internally about this kid? Because he just to give people context, this is a 16-year-old switch hitter or 17-year-old switch hitter who in the Dominican Summer League, which again, caveats aside, more walks and strikeouts, 28 steals, slugged nearly 600. And everyone who saw him was like, he's the best player in the league. Yeah. So I know we just dealt with Chourio. It seems ridiculous that they could have another guy along these like super fast track. So it's way too, this kid might come to stateside and suck. Totally possible. But I did want to acknowledge it because people in the industry are freaking out about this kid. So I wanted to mention it.
Insane, like, exit velos for his age. Insane. Like, well, the bat to ball stuff is pretty good. The pitch selection is pretty good. Like, I was putting out a mid-season prospect ranking update for the Brewers, and like, this kid had done like 2 weeks in the DSL.
Right.
Was talking to people with the Brewers like, please, dear God, give me something here. Like, where do I rank him? And there's a couple other guys too. Like, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
I was already intrigued by the kid, and the guy's like, we just had a call today, and the people in the DSL will not shut up about this guy. Like, all the usual caveats, but like, it's been since Chourio that like people talk about a kid like this. And now who knows if he turns out to be like that, but he was electrifying that league, way too good for it, quite clearly. He was sort of on the radar a little bit when he signed.
I mean, he got $1 million. It's not like he was a totally nobody, but
he wasn't the guy in the class.
No,
and normally when you're not the guy in the class, you don't shoot up quite that fast.
No,
but super interesting prospect. I mean, like, tools across the board. Should be a fine defender. Like,
long way to go. Long way to go.
Right. A lot of ball left.
So there's a lot of ball left, but this is someone who we could see, in affiliated ball or in, a full season league at 18 next year, and we could be talking about him. So,
and most importantly, his name reads as Jesus made.
Jesus made. Which, again, you guys can email in your best jokes about that at baseballbarbacast@gmail.com. So anyway, there's your Jesus Made update for everybody who is wondering. Jesus Made, born May 8th. 2007. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we return on Baseball Barbacast, we're going to bounce around the other Central divisions, which are indeed very intriguing. We'll be right back. And we are back here on Baseball Barbacast. I am Jordan Schusterman, joined by Curt Hogg of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. The Brewers talk is behind us, but we will continue on with some NL Central chatter. And let's start with the Chicago Cubs, who have already won a series this week in Dodger Stadium. Another big win last night. We'll see if they can sweep them tonight on Wednesday. But the Cubs, for the first 2, 3, 4 months, were one of the most disappointing teams in baseball. Then they traded for Isaac Paredes for some reason. And we were like, all right, well, I guess they bought sort of, kind of. They gave up on Morel. This is strange. They're not totally selling. They're not totally buying. And then they start playing really well. Now, they were beating up on a lot of bad teams. And it was like, okay, well, they're taking advantage of the schedule. But suddenly it was like, okay, can Craig Counsell and crew salvage this season? They're not catching the Brewers, but can they make things interesting? Now they notch a couple wins against a good team in the Dodgers. What has your perception been of the Cubs from afar? Has anything surprised you about them? I was low on Counsell aside, regardless. I was low on the roster coming into the season. I was not someone, as I mentioned, I picked the Cardinals. Did see them as kind of a 500-ish team, but it's starting to come together. What has surprised you or not surprised you about the Cubs this season from afar?
Well, from afar, I would be lying if I didn't say that the main thing I've been watching is Counsell and like just the media side of it. Yeah, I was just curious to see like if from someone else's perspective after being in that room. That's really not that interesting. So the Cubs though are pretty interesting.
Yeah,
like they are just a little over 500. They're not good, but they're not bad, and like I feel like PCA is coming along great and is looking like holy smokes! Like this guy could be like an easy 4-win player next year.
Yes,
yes, that's a pretty big deal. Like it feels like there's going to be on the outside looking in. There's just not a lot of time left.
Sure,
and they have not shown. I just still don't feel confident that they can rattle off like 15-5.
No, especially with the teams ahead of them.
They do feel like a team that is set up to be an off-season hype machine. Year 2 under Counsell. I'm crafting the narratives already. Year 2 under Counsell. They'll go get Corbin Burns or something like that. Not Soto, but someone.
Yeah, very possible.
And they'll be right in the thick of it in the discussions, and they probably should be.
Yeah, of course. Well, we've said this all year, right? Like, but this is why I want to keep it focused. I think everything you're saying about next year is valid. But again, we've said this many times on the show this year. They didn't pay Craig Counsell the most money a manager ever to just take his time, right? Like they came in and expected to win. Now it's not, as I've made the point many times, this isn't Craig Counsell's fault. Right? And as we see in Milwaukee, especially when we talk about, Counsell, what a genius when it comes to managing the bullpen. And maybe that is true. Maybe that isn't true, whatever. Ultimately, you got to be able to have good buttons to press, right? And the Cubs have fewer good buttons to press, at least in the bullpen. They've started to find some. Porter Hodge has been a kind of a Brewers-esque revelation in the bullpen for them. Tyson Miller, kind of the same way. But again, that isn't necessarily just about Counsell. It's about the whole pitching development team. That said, like, how have you seen him manage it? Do you think that I know we still have a little bit of time left, but the pressure is still going to remain on him. The casual fan still looks at Craig Counsell and think like, hey man, why aren't you making this magic happen?
Yeah, I think there's a different dynamic, an interesting dynamic. In Milwaukee, I can't speak entirely to how it is, I expect it to be in Chicago, but in Milwaukee, you come up and Craig Counsell was this established, entrenched presence in the ball club. And that's just how the entire clubhouse operated. It was Counsell's the guy. And there was no question about it. I have no idea what it's like in Chicago when they were 8 games under 500, 6 games under whatever it was, in the middle of the summer.
Yeah.
I don't know how the inner clubhouse dynamics played into it, but clearly something worked and they've turned it around a little bit. Like, I think we're seeing that Counsell still is a good manager, but then again, you're not paying him $40 million to miss the playoffs. And what essentially amounts to like still not a great division. The Brewers are a pretty good team, but this division is not good.
This is exactly what I wanted to turn to. And quick note just on PCA, since you mentioned him, obviously 2 awesome catches last night, 901 OPS in his last 40 games. That's not a small sample for maybe the best defensive center fielder on the planet already. So he is, so we'll see. Long way to go there. I'm still striking out a good amount, but so coming into the season, like I said, I picked the Cardinals, but I did say, I was like, I think, and the projections, back this up, I believe this to be the flattest division. And what I meant by that was that I thought it was going to be the smallest differential between first and last place. Now, the Brewers are making that not likely because they're going to probably still win this game by this division by a bunch of games. But you look at the other 4 teams, and that is kind of proving to be true. All these 4 teams have basically, now we're starting to see some separation as the Pirates have played really, really poorly. But there is a really good stretch there in the middle of the summer where those 4 teams behind the Brewers were basically just trading positions almost every day, and that I think speaks to a lot of disappointing stuff. I mean, you could talk about how disappointing St. Louis has been, but even Cincinnati after last season, and injuries have certainly ravaged them, expecting steps forward. Pittsburgh, a lot of good things that were happening on the pitching side, but they can't hit enough to take any steps forward either. So to your point, the Brewers have really taken advantage here. And I think that you could argue that all these teams were expecting to take advantage of this weak division, and the Brewers are the only ones that have. And I think credit to them. But I guess the last thing on the NL Central before we switch to the AL Central is anything else that has actually surprised you between any of these other teams, whether it is the Cardinals or the Cubs or the Reds or the Pirates?
I think the Reds not like taking any semblance of a jump. And I didn't expect them to win like 85 games this year, so maybe they're not even that far off what my expectations were. But like at no point this year, I don't think you look at this division, you go, oh yeah, the Reds are a threat, whether it's the wild card or like even like to keep up with the Cubs even. Like they just never got that vibe. And they're getting this ridiculous season from Ellie, and it's still all just a bit underwhelming. They have all these young, talented players. And so the Reds are a little surprising in that area.
Yeah, and now they have like their whole rotation is on the IL, and Ellie has certainly cooled off. But yeah, I mean, they still have a plus 21 run differential when the Cardinals are at minus 66. So there are some strange things in this division. And I would say, too, you mentioned the Cubs going into next year. I'm really curious about which of these teams. Cardinals have some tough decisions to make this winter for sure about their leadership and their roster. And the Cubs, too. And we'll see how the Brewers respond to that. But Brewers obviously cruising. And maybe we will have you on again to talk about them come postseason time. But let's talk about the AL Central here for a little bit, because that's maybe the other race that is surprisingly, shockingly compelling. Now, I know the Guardians are 3.5 up, and the Twins have struggled recently. But this fun fact is very basic, but kind of stunning. Last year, I'm writing a little bit about this today, just about the AL postseason race. And last year, the Twins ran away with this division. They were the only team in this division above 500, right? This year, the AL Central has 4 teams above 500. They're the only division in baseball with 4 teams that are above 500. So that in and of itself kind of speaks to it. Now, okay, you could say, hey, wait a minute. The White Sox, hello. And yeah, you're right. And the White Sox are 8-40 against the rest of this division. So
and all of that's against Cleveland. All their wins are against
Cleveland.
Right,
five of those wins are against Cleveland. That's correct. So that is certainly skewing the numbers a little bit. But what have you made of as a fellow Midwesterner? This has been a very fun division to watch. And while the Guardians might end up, comfortably winning it, we could have 3 AL Central postseason teams. And with a 4th one, sort of making things interesting. I mean, this is truly the shock of all of this, far, far more than the NL Central being mid.
It's music to my ears. It's good for ball, they say.
It is. It is good for ball.
The flyover country teams making the playoffs. There's one trick frustrates the East Coast and the West Coast. The AL Central beating up on the White Sox to get above 500. I don't know what to make of this division. Like I watch a decent amount of these teams, whether in person or just like hanging out and watching them. And like Bobby Witt's incredible. But like there's all these other huge question marks on all these teams. The Twins are kind of sliding now. Like they probably have the Twins people probably had some questions about their own team coming into this slide. Like their record against good teams, I think that's one of their numbers, was like pretty bad. The Guardians lineup, questions there. The Royals, I mean, like this is the AL Central in a nutshell. But sure enough, they might put 3 teams into this thing, and that would be awesome.
I want to hit on the Twins here for a couple minutes, just because I said something recently on the show about how never really were good enough to where it's like we have to talk about them. Then I remembered they won 12 in a row. Now this was back in like April, so I'll say, and Cleveland was still basically keeping pace with them. Like they never got to first place. They did win 12 in a row. And do you remember what happened when they were winning all the time? Now, by the way, that 12-game winning streak was White Sox, Angels, White Sox, Red Sox. so maybe that's why I wasn't taking it so seriously. But the point is, I bring that up.
You got to win those games.
We got to win those games. We had the Rally Sausage.
The sausage,
which is now back. It's back. I don't know if you saw that.
I was going to say, take a trip down to Sheboygan. And get some brats.
That's true. There you go.
Get some summer sausage.
Scotty boy himself here knows all about the summer sausage. But here's the thing. Since then, they've just been really steady, kind of hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold, to the point where now when they go cold recently, it's like, wait a minute. We're running out of games, and now you're the third team wild card. The Royals are playing well. Now it's like, okay, you're the one hanging on for a postseason spot. And bigger picture, the Twins are the team, because of how inactive they've been in the offseason, at the trade deadline, not spending money. They're one of the teams saying, TV deal, we can't spend any money. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, whatever. The point is they are not, they're not feeling good. They're not really trending up. Now, they might still make the postseason anyway, and maybe they have a good enough team to make some noise. But the Tigers, there's no pressure on them, right? I mean, if they come up short, they have played so well in the second half that you're going to feel good going into second. Royals, obviously, right? I mean, as far as teams that are feeling as good as anyone compared to this year, and you say biggest surprise of this season, sure, you could say the Brewers. The Brewers did win the division last year. The Royals lost 106 games. Okay, so the Royals, I think, are still in their own category in that sense. And the Guardians, too, after having a really poor season last year, have to be feeling really good, even with the questions of the roster. Whereas the Twins, even if they sneak in, it's hard to feel like there's been a big step forward after what they did last year. And injuries have contributed to that. But that's where I'm a little bit worried. And I'd be curious where Twins fans feel about that. That's where I feel like even if they do sneak in, I am a little concerned about the overall direction of the team.
Right.
So that's kind of where my just a couple Twins thoughts there.
I do love lineups like theirs where it's like no black holes. There's I mean, when they have guys going really well, they have some superstar level hitters there. But the way it's played out this year, Matt Wallner's been amazing. But like it's just a steady lineup of like league average to just above league average hitters. Anyone can beat you. No one's really going to crush you, but it goes a long way.
And to your point, compared to the other teams in their division, where the upside is higher at the top of the lineup for Cleveland, for Kansas City, obviously, but the bottom half,
there's a lot.
Oh boy,
we saw that when Cleveland was in Milwaukee.
Yeah,
they had J-Ram had a homer, and Naylor hit a couple, and then no one else did.
It's pretty thin, and Kwan's been cold recently, so that's also been a little bit tough because he's just such a big part of their offense. And now we see when Vinny Pasquantino goes out, what that does to Kansas City. Now they're playing a little bit better, but all those teams, it's really interesting. And obviously the last kind of topic on that little AL Central or AL postseason race, just, since I'm writing about it right now, like if we are going to get a race, it's going to require, you have the Twins, and then those 3 teams, you have Boston, Seattle, and Detroit are kind of within sort of striking distance. Now, what Detroit has is they get to still play the White Sox 3 more times. So those are that we love that for them.
3 wins.
But but they also have to play the Orioles 6 times, so that's not good. The Red Sox probably honestly have the toughest path at this point, just based on their schedule and how they're playing. And then the Mariners they have also a very difficult schedule. The difference with Seattle is that there is still a outside chance to compete for a division in the way that these other teams don't have, and they do play Houston again in a couple of weeks. So if they can survive the next couple of weeks and be within 3 games of the Houston when they go to Houston, maybe. But they're giving very little reason to feel super optimistic about them. Their offense remains still stuck in the mud in a lot of respects. So, and then the other thing with them is they have this big homestand coming up, and it's like, oh, the Rangers, they're not very good. They're coming to town. Oh, just kidding. You have Kumar Rocker, Jacob deGrom, Max Scherzer are pitching these next 3 games. So not exactly going to get a break on offense in any respect there. But any other big picture kind of postseason picture thoughts before we take one final break and then we'll wrap it up?
Yeah, now that we've talked about the Twins are going to win the whole thing. That's about it.
Yeah. No, that is probably true. Quickly, Mets or Braves?
Mets.
Mets. You think the Mets will make the postseason?
I do. I'm not moved by the Braves. There's people around the Brewers that are not with the Brewers, but just around. They're like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to face that Braves rotation in the postseason.
I mean,
that's fair. Wild card series. Okay, Chris Sale's really good. Yeah. But the lineup, the whole team does not give off the vibe the Mets give.
Okay, well, noted. And the reason I ask is because, as you mentioned, a very likely, as things stand, first round opponent for the Brew-crew. So we will see if that ultimately comes to fruition. All right, we're going to take one final break. And when we return, we will do a couple quick hits from last night, and then we'll say goodbye. And welcome back to the end of this Wednesday edition of Baseball Barbercast. Jordan Schusterman, Curt Hogg of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, pinch hitting for Jake Mintz, who will be back on Friday. Don't you worry. A couple things just from last night. Yoshinobu Yamamoto came back. I don't know. Has he faced the Brewers this year?
No, he has not. He was on the IL both times.
Well, he is. I was just reminded of how fun it is to watch him pitch. And I know the Cubs ended up winning that game, but we should not forget how good he started to look before he got injured. He was delivering on the hype, and he's so good. So I'm really excited to have him back. And now you got Gavin Stone hurt again. Glasnow maybe coming back. Dodgers rotation ravaged as ever. So it's just huge. Yamamoto is just absolutely one of the most important pitchers in the entire league for the rest of the season. So that him coming back is an absolutely massive deal. Ben Joyce is hurt. So yeah, we talked about him throwing 105.5 miles an hour. And then he hasn't pitched since then. So, yeah,
not great.
I don't.
Not great.
Right. So I don't. Again, I talked. Well, you can go back and listen to that conversation. I was like, yeah, the great thing about Ben Joyce is he's been healthy. He's throwing really hard and he's pitching a lot and it's going well. He had a sketchy medical track record. I know he says, "Oh, I'll be fine. I'll come back and pitch again this year." I hope so, but it's just. Maybe flew a little too close to the sun with that one. So we will see there. Other couple beats of injury news. Jeff McNeil is out for the year with, I believe, a wrist fracture. That just means more Jose Iglesias. So if you're sick of hearing his smash hit song, well, sorry, it's only going to continue even more as he is the starting second baseman, I guess, for the Mets. I don't know if you've been bumping it. Are you the top 1% fans on Spotify?
get ready to learn OMG, buddy.
Yeah, that's how we all feel. Yeah, well, you said before. Oh yeah, the Mets. Well, careful what you wish for, buddy. Even though I guess that series. I know that series would be in Milwaukee, but
could we make that if we'd make that a home and home? I just need to.
I'm sorry.
It.
Do you want to do that, Trell? You're saying you want to do a whole. You want to go back-to-back days going from Milwaukee to New York and then back to Milwaukee for game 3?
Okay, can we put writers on the charters again? That's a discussion we need to bring up again.
Okay.
How many times, when you're sitting at LAX at 10 p.m. and you're like, oh God, I'm not going to land in Milwaukee till 3.
I like how you're saying that. Like everyone listening is like, "Oh, yes, I hate when that happens."
Hey, if you've done bad travel, and everyone else you're with, like as you walk out of the ballpark, everyone's like, "Have a safe flight." You're like, "Yeah, have fun on your charter.
Enjoy your
charter, catered meals and your Chick-fil-A."
Kurt's not mad.
No, I love my job. I love my life.
No, this is great. This
don't love the travel.
No, we need it. I know, but that's why I'm saying. I'm like, are you crazy? You want a home and home?
Yeah, maybe not.
It would be very.
I could go for some good food in Queens though. I'd be down.
That's true. It would be a fun trip, just not on the quick turnaround. Get Curt on the charter. So that's unfortunate. And then the other NL East injury is Reynaldo Lopez exited with some shoulder issues. He had like a scare earlier this year. I don't know if it was elbow or shoulder, and I was like, well, he's been amazing, but he's approaching. I mean, he had started in the past, but he hadn't thrown anywhere close to this number of innings in like 5 or 6 years. And I was like, listen, you're pushing it here. So that's something to monitor. Hopefully he's okay. He has been amazing when he has been on the mound, and also continues to highlight the importance of Spencer Schwellenbach, who has been, tremendous for them, as well as, Charlie Morton, who looked a lot better the other day. Luis Castillo has a hamstring strain. He might miss the rest of the regular season for the Mariners. They haven't really had anybody hurt the whole season. I know Brian Wu was dealing with some stuff earlier this year, but they have been one of the healthiest rotations in the league, in addition to one of the best. So how they fill in for him is important, but also maybe not, because they might just miss the playoffs by 10 games and no one will even remember that. And then the last one is, right, I already mentioned Kumar Rocker will debut tomorrow, so we'll definitely talk about that on Friday. DeGrom coming back on Friday, that's a big deal. And then Rhett Lauder, just wanted to mention, we didn't mention with the Reds, but Rhett Lauder in his first 3 starts has been awesome for Cincinnati. So he's someone I think we will be very, very excited about going into next year for the Reds of Cincinnati. But obviously, a lot of other questions for that organization this winter. If you are like me and are a total dork and are excited for the Dominican Winter League, the Dominican Winter League rookie draft is this evening. You can watch that on YouTube. And you might not know what's going on, but I'll tweet about it and I'll help you out. It's a delightful thing. So I will be watching that. Curt, do you have any plans? Any debate hot takes you want to squeeze in here to the? No, don't do that.
No.
Especially not in Wisconsin.
I
really appreciate you pinch hitting. I hope you had a good time. Thank you for your generosity, and Brewers continuing their series in San Francisco, and we'll see. We'll have you back on maybe at some point if they are in the World Series or something.
Who knows? It might be a swift exit.
It might be.
Might be a long run.
We might.
Who knows?
Maybe we'll be heading for a Brewers Guardians all Midwest World Series.
Yeah. And, maybe you guys will be on some flights here.
I hope so. I've said this before. Milwaukee is one of the 4 ballparks left I have not been to.
Oh, really? Oh, good airport too.
I would love to have that change over the next couple months, but we will see. Thank you, Curt Hogg of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Go support his work over there. Thank you to Andrew Hartz for producing this podcast, and thank you to Jake Mintz for getting married and throwing an incredible party this weekend. It was a great time, and congratulations again to Jake and Tamar. You can email us at baseballrubbercast@gmail.com. I will be back with Jake on Friday. Thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you soon.